Hello, we'd like to welcome you to this webinar on the Co-op Index tool, which was recorded on June 26, 2013 in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The webinar is presented by Dr. Ryszard Stocky, Associate Professor at the University of Social Sciences and Humanities in Katowice, Poland, along with Peter Huff of the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, John McNamara of Union Cab in Madison and the Democracy at Work Network, and Dr. Sonia Novkovich, Professor of Economics at St. Mary's University in Halifax. These four speakers make up a team of academics and practitioners who are working together to develop, test, and refine the Co-op Index tool for worker cooperatives. The Co-op Index tool is designed to help worker co-ops measure and assess their organizational effectiveness based on the degree of participation that employees and/or members experience in the management of their organization. The tool also helps co-ops measure their degree of adherence to universally recognized cooperative principles and values. Unfortunately, when we started recording this webinar, we missed the very introduction, so you'll be joining the webinar about 2 minutes into Dr. Ryszard Stocky's presentation. If you have further questions about the Co-op Index tool, you can visit the website, which is coopindex.ca. Thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy the presentation.
In Poland, at least, and what I hear in other countries, the cooperatives have great problems in maintaining the values-based identity. I think the cooperatives are completely different from other companies. So the main reason why we developed this tool was to answer the questions: what can be done that they can still compete in the market economy and keep the values, traditional cooperative values. The second reason we decided to develop the tool was that the changes in the cooperative movement, at least in Poland, go like boiling the frog, that is, without noticing that anything is changing. We organized a conference for worker co-ops just 2 years ago, and we found out that those people there, the leaders of all those co-ops, did not realize that they are no longer co-ops. That what they're thinking is very, I would say, very capitalistic and very much oriented on profits, with no care about the people, not to mention community, etc. So one of the possibilities for this frog not to be boiled to death would be to have a thermometer put and the temperature measured. So in a sense, metaphorically speaking, we would like to have this tool to see how the water is warm. Generally speaking, when I'm looking into the theoretical background behind the tools and behind my different analysis of organizations, is that I see the cooperatives as collective companies which are somewhere between totalism, which would be, for instance, state-owned companies, and individualism, where we have international corporations. So the collectivist companies are companies that are, well, could be presented by this blue area here, that are somewhere between these two. In individualism, the people are taking care of the profit only, and in totalism, everything is given to the community, so to say. So individual good is not important at all. Now, if you look into the ideologies, I think it can be seen in something which I called tacit anthropology. Tacit anthropology, it may have different other meanings, but the people simply have certain frames of thinking about economy. One extreme would be the social, like Friedman would be, he's for instance defining the social responsibility of business as to increase its profits. Of course, this is the extreme individualism. On the other hand, and this is the middle area of participation, the human person and is seen as the end of economy. So in a company, in a corporate company, and Aris Mediarieta was one of the founders of Mondragon cooperative, he sees that there is a huge difference between the profit as the final end and the person as the final end of a cooperative. Of course, this is a huge difference, and I think this slide shows that if we really want to diagnose the cooperatives, we should not support our diagnosis only on the economic part, so to say, even if it's a single bottom line or triple bottom line, but in persons partnerships we should be looking at repeated bottom lines, in the sense that every person's view is important, because every person is in a sense a bottom line of a cooperative. So if we agree with Aris Mediarieta that in a cooperative what counts is the person, then we should build such a measurement philosophy or such a measurement tool that would give us way of finding out every single person's view of the cooperative. So, and what we try to do in our tool in Co-op Index is exactly having this. So this we are not interested in finding any means, for instance, but we are always interested in finding how many people there are who have certain views about a given cooperative. This is described in this picture. Now, what is important here is that we have to remember that cooperatives are different organizations than all other organizations. Of course, there's a fashion now to have different views or different declarations of values and principles in general, but these values and principles are more tools for PR than real tools for management. In one company, big corporations, I have rewritten the declarations of values. I put them literally into the questionnaire. I distributed it into employees, and they have signed and answered the questions. And after I have presented them, I asked them, do you recognize these? And they did not realize even that this was taken from their website. So I think this is more or less what it looks like. In cooperatives, it's completely different. So, and the important thing is that in cooperatives, the social purpose, the person, is somehow entwined with economic goals. So we also have to see the performance in measuring both the economic and the principles and values. Just a few words, I don't know whether you know it or not, but the Co-op Index was developed in such a way that we had a group of people who were in a kind of a dream mood. They were writing what would be their ideal co-op, worker co-op. We had, and out of this dream image, we have built the list of questions, which were only a little bit supplemented by other questions that were not formed about more technical aspects of management. So in fact, all the dreams were, or the dream or ideal co-op image is in the questions. So it looks more or less like this. So we have real co-ops, then we have the ideal co-op, and as I said, this ideal co-op is additionally supported by the concept of total participation. I don't want to go into too much detail about what is total participation, but it's a real participation, not fake participation, as it very often happens. So this is more or less how we measure. So the closer the real answers are to the ideal, the better, you might say. Now, what are the questions like? Well, the questions are, in fact, about something that is very close. They are about the practices that they can see, they can view in everyday life of a co-op. So we are not asking the members or employees about any theoretical issues. But what we do is then we categorize the answers in such a way that we get answers related to different aspects of co-op management, so that we can see where the problems are. So this is more or less, so this is how the co-op index works. Knowing that not many people are interested in everything, we have built the report after the studies in such a way that there is something for everyone. So we have something like 4 numbers, and that would be the shortest report. 4 numbers. Some people want to have all universe into 1 number. So we have this as a very general index, and this may be useful, for instance, for comparisons between co-ops of the same type. So that's why I think it's useful. Then we have more detailed and more detailed reports, until very detailed analysis of all the results. As I'm going to say a few words about each of these, I'm not going to continue with this picture. So first of all is that 2 indexes: organizational maturity index, organizational trust index. These are measures which were, the first one is based on a selected number of questions. So we asked, I think, about 10 experts to select the most crucial questions for a co-op, and on this basis we have developed this index. OT index is based on the data from the process of the trust index is based on the data from the how many people answered how many questions in general. Then we have the selection of questions related to cooperative values and then cooperative principles. So again, in the same way, we selected all the questions that would refer to values and have the index calculated the same with the principles. And we have something like a general view. So this is what I call the panorama, management panorama. And what is important here is that not usually in the middle line is the mean value, but not in this picture. For us, the mean value is the most important measure of the organization maturity, and we see which of the dimensions differ positively or negatively from this organization maturity. So this is the important thing, and you can see there are 30 smaller scales important for different aspects of management. So we have organizational systems, organizational climate, attitudes, and outcomes. Okay. Then, as I said, we are interested mainly in the number of persons in a co-op which held a certain view about the co-op. So, for instance, the co-op provides opportunities for professional development. How many people think that? We'll see that in this example there'll be something like 75% that would help this view, but the rest would have opposite view. So this shows, in a sense, this shows us the real distribution of the opinions. So in a sense, this picture shows every single person's opinion about what's happening. Okay. We also have in this report a smaller summaries of, for instance, the value summary, and here you have the health, responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, solidarity, and how they are met in a co-op. And the same with the adherence to cooperative principles. Again, the co-op gets the results, what they should work on. For instance, voluntary and open membership would be a weak point here. And immediately after seeing this picture, you could say that the action to be taken can be shown. Again, also in these cases, there will be a list of questions that refer to a given scale, and again, how many people answered in what way. So this is it. From apart from this, the Co-op Index tool has plenty of different possibilities, especially important for consultants that help to analyze demographic data against all those results that I have shown you. So you may easily find whether the women and men, female and males are treated equally, for instance, because you can have it. Whether the people of different ages or different educations, etc. So all these can also be reported. They are not so nicely presented graphically as the previous, but you can have tables which allow such analysis, and they may be important, especially if you have some suspicion that something wrong may be happening in one place or another. So generally speaking, the whole purpose of Co-op Index is to help in diagnosing and preparing the co-op for improvement. And I think what is its greatest value is that the report is done almost automatically, and it means that it's very cheap. So in comparison to any other tools where you have to pay a lot of money, here you get all these data that I was talking about almost very, very cheap. But of course, because of this, it is not fitted into the needs of a given co-op, etc. So if this is needed, then of course the analysis would take longer, and changing the tool would require some actions. But of course it is also possible, but it would consume more time. So this is more or less it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Excellent, thank you very much. So Peter Huff, most of you know who he is and what he does, but Peter has been engaged in co-op development, research, training, management, and I don't even know how many years. I don't think it's 20. It's got to be more. But Peter has been with us with the CURA, Community University Research Alliances, since the social economy. He has training in social audits and has been working, and now is actually teaching courses in co-op development online with the Co-op Zone. He is the financial officer with the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation and has been the brains of the operation for us for quite some time. So Peter, down to you and the cooperative that we have formed to actually administer the Coop Index tool.
My role today is just to talk a bit about the Impact Diagnostic Services Cooperative that we've incorporated. When we started the process of developing the diagnostic tool for worker co-ops, we decided from the beginning that we wanted to have an organization, preferably a cooperative, that ultimately would become the owners and administrators of the tool. As you're aware, that the tool was developed through a couple of research projects that were funded through the federal government, and so we wanted to have a sort of a separate independent co-op that would bring together the people that were both developing the tool and people that might be using the tool and administering the tool. And we felt that a cooperative was the best way to do that. We've had discussions, and as you can see, we have partners from different countries, and so we thought having an international cooperative that would administer and own the tool was the best way to go. And so last year, August of 2012, we federally incorporated a cooperative in Canada here that incorporated a multi-stakeholder cooperative with 4 different classes of membership that can be involved in the cooperative. So we have the Co-op Index developers, which are basically the group of people from worker co-op developers, and the academics who have been working on developing the tool and testing the tool. We have cooperative federations and associations that are actively involved in promoting the tool to its members. And one of the first goals of the tool from the beginning was to ensure that it would be very useful from a very pragmatic perspective for individual worker co-ops to be able to use it. And so the federations in Canada and the US have been very actively promoting the use of the tool with their members. The third class is the cooperative consultants, and as Richard said, the automated report gets produced relatively cheaply and relatively quickly, but if you want to do a full diagnosis, then you really need an independent consultant who's been trained in the use and the analysis of the tool, that works with your co-op and works with a steering committee to assess the results of the tool, look at some other issues in the organization, such as documents, strategic plans, and whatnot. So basically, this class of members are the folks that have been trained to provide a full diagnosis for the co-ops that are using the tool. And then lastly, we have a class of members that would just be supporting members. They could be individual worker co-ops or individuals or other organizations that are just interested in seeing the development of measurement tools for cooperatives. As a cooperative, it's a non-profit, non-share capital organization. Its bylaws allow the directors to set dues for different classes of memberships, but at this stage we have not set any dues for memberships, and the goal, if we do end up with some dues for memberships, would be they'd be nominal. So really what we're trying to do is just bring people together in the organization that are committed to the use and development of the tool. Application forms are available, so anybody that's on the webinar today that would be interested in joining the membership of the cooperative, applications are available, and we would be happy to send one to you. So basically the goals of the Impact Diagnostic Services Co-op are to engage in the further development of the Coop Index tool, or tools, and there is some discussion about developing tools for other forms of cooperatives and perhaps specialized types of cooperatives within different cooperative sectors. So even within the worker cooperative sector, excuse me, we've been developing a tool that relates primarily to a kind of hierarchical management structure, but another for a horizontal management structure. And John McNamara will be speaking to you later a bit about that. So basically, the capacity to develop and keep advancing the tool. Administering access to the Coop Index tool, we wanted to, although we want everybody to be able to use the tool and keep it accessible, we didn't want it to simply be accessible to anybody that did not have any training or a common commitment to the goals and objectives of the reason for the tool being developed in the first place. So we didn't want to just make it completely open access for any consultant anywhere to pick up and use the tool. We wanted to maintain some access, some control over access to the tool to ensure that it was being used in the way that it's intended to support the development of worker cooperatives. The other thing that the co-op does is it will collect and determines access of the data. So one of the things that we're trying to do is collect data on a large number of worker co-ops. So again, we could do some broad sector research on co-ops. So the services co-op maintains the data and will control through its board of directors policies and decisions who has access to use the data for research purposes. And then the co-op also looks towards expanding the use of the tool through developing it into other languages. Currently it's being translated into English and French and Spanish, and Simon was recently in Indonesia, and there's some interest there. We've had interest from folks in Spain and Finland as well in terms of possibly using the tool. So I think the tool has been outlined in much more detail by Richard. So just to reiterate, it's a confidential survey based on the theory of total participation management, and the Excel tool provides the data analysis and produces the automated report as Richard was showing you. And if you do have an external consultant with you, then the external consultant would be developing recommendations through the dialogue with the steering committee on the co-op, and the research that they do through the tool and through in-person interviews, as well as doing a review of documents that the co-op has and uses for its governance and operations. So to license the tool for a co-op, we have an individual license, so each co-op that wants to use the tool can access the tool for $150 Canadian. We haven't actually formalized the fees for non-Canadian cooperatives, but essentially, we'll be looking at the what's a fair price within the context in which the cooperative operates, whether it be in Europe or South America or the US or Canada. If you're working with a consultant, the consultant's fees to carry out the diagnosis, to produce a more detailed analysis of the report with detailed recommendations coming out of the report is a separate fee that the cooperative would negotiate between the consultant, the trained consultant, and themselves. That's a separate issue from the licensing fee. Federations and associations can purchase group licenses so that they can actually provide a license to their members on a discounted rate. and we're looking at basically selling licenses to the federations for a minimum of a group of 5 licenses, and they would be at a price only of $75 per license, and they would then be able to use those licenses for individual members of their federations. Even if a co-op is using a federation license, a group license for the discount, they will still sign the individual license, not to pay any fees, but basically the individual license approves the aggregation of the data. So it approves the Co-op Index to aggregate their data for further research with other cooperatives. So in terms of the license parameters, basically if you get the license for the $150, it includes setting up and administering the survey. This can be done directly by Impact Services Co-op, or it can also be done by the co-op consultant that's working directly with the cooperative. It produces the automated report. If the Impact develops a report, it provides it to the co-op's consultant. Excuse me, that would be conducting the audit. And then it also commits the co-op to allow for the aggregation of data without identifying components for research purposes. We really think this is an important part of the process because it will allow us to, over time, get a much better picture of the strengths and the weaknesses of the sector as a whole or individual types of cooperatives within the sector, which then may allow federations and those co-ops to develop in training or other services that could be useful for improving and bringing those cooperatives closer to the ideal. And then the co-op also commits to maintaining the data for a minimum of 5 years. So if a co-op wants to come back and do the diagnosis 2 years later after doing it the first time, they can actually compare the data from their first go-round to the second go-round and see whether the interventions that they've been engaging in the interim have led to higher scores or lower scores, or what is happening within their cooperative. It is possible that other versions of the tools may be developed, and so if they are developed, they will be developed basically based on the acceptance of the Coop Index developers. So again, if somebody wants to use the tool to develop a new version for another type of cooperative or type of sector, they will have to receive approval back from the cooperative. And such tools would still be owned by the Impact Cooperative, so any tools that are derived from the Coop Index will still become part of Impact Cooperatives. However, the sponsors that are developing the tool would be able to use it for a nominal fee going forward. Co-op Index consultants, the members of Impact Co-op that actually can provide services and complete the diagnosis for folks, must receive training from the co-op, and this training helps them administer and analyze the Co-op Index to make sure that it's being used in the appropriate way, and that the co-ops that are using the survey have someone that's delivering the services to them that is trained in how to do that. It also gives them access to set up the surveys online so they can administer the co-ops that they're working with very directly on LimeSurvey, and it also gives them access to the administrative assistance from Impact Cooperative if it's required as they're carrying out their work. We use LimeSurvey, which is similar for those that may not know it to SurveyMonkey, except that it gives us better control over access to data. So all of the data is collected through LimeSurvey, but as a consultant working on a particular co-op, you would only have access to the data of the individual co-op or co-ops that you've actually worked with. The rest of the data collected for other co-ops would be completely controlled by the Impact Cooperative, so that when you're working, the cooperative knows that the only individual, aside from the administrators of Impact Cooperative itself, that can access the data directly would be the co-op consultant that's working with them. It's also possible to set up sub-administrators for individual countries. So although at this stage with the small numbers that we've been using, we simply have a single administration. If need be, we can set up sub-administrators if the use of the tool expands in a way that would require that. So the goal is to have sufficient data as a foundation for research on worker co-ops, as I've mentioned. The IMPACT Co-op will approve all the uses of the data. So again, the data that's being aggregated is still under control of the co-op. The research results that will be available for worker co-ops. So again, research that is the data that's supplied to academic researchers or other researchers, the work and results that comes out of that data will be shared back to the worker co-ops that have been involved in terms of remitting and aggregating their data. And then research, of course, may be published in professional journals or other appropriate forums. Again, of course, recognizing that identification information would not be accessible in that way. So that's the end of my presentation on the co-op that we've developed to administer the Coop Index.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. So John McNamara has been a member of this team from the beginning, really, when we started developing the Coop Index. He is working in Union Cap of Madison in a large worker cooperative with about 250 members. He is a graduate of St. Mary's Masters in Co-ops and Credit Unions, and now PhD, working towards his PhD, that is, at St. Mary's. And it is my pleasure to introduce John. He is also, of course, involved with the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops and the DAWN program. He will tell you a little bit more about that. John?
So I guess what I'm going to be talking about is some of the changes we've made. And as you can see on the screen, one of the things we learned in the United States, where the cooperatives tend to be more of a flattened hierarchical nature, that some of the language we used in the Co-op Index didn't really speak to the workers in some of these co-ops, and so we had to go back and change it. We worked actually with a small collective in California that took the Co-op Index and went through some of the language, and as you can see, some of it's relatively easy, changing words like employees to members, but when we got into areas of supervisor or the CEO, it becomes a little bit more difficult to change the language, and so start thinking about people in work groups, or how decisions get made within these organizations. And we see that in the question number 35, changing the concept of management, even using the term leaders, can have somewhat of a charged language within co-ops. So talking about informal and formal leaderships, informal and formal rules in more of the collectivized workplaces. There's some that don't have any rules, in fact, or do any budgeting or have anything formal written down. But there's, of course, still some sort of informal process that happens. And so it's trying to develop survey language that gets at this isn't very easy. I don't think we've actually used these questions in a field survey yet. That maybe when we get to comments, maybe some of the folks that are here from DAWN, which is the Democracy Work Network, might be able to comment on whether they have or not. But it's something that we need to do, as this is kind of sort of a continually evolving tool, and I think this kind of shows some of the ways that we can manipulate and evolve and change the tool to meet the needs of the co-ops that we're serving throughout the different countries and cultures. So these are just some more of the questions. So you see there are actually a fair number of questions, about 20 or 30 altogether, and again, coming up with some of the different, trying to anticipate what the different types of issues would be is kind of makes for a little bit of stilted language, but hopefully as we use it, it'll improve. So the next, I guess, thing I've been asked to talk about is when we're out there talking to cooperatives about why they should do it. Number of them are interested, but also sometimes the number of scales in the questionnaire, having 180 questions can be a little bit of a hard sell. But one of the things that I know I talk about, and maybe some of the people on the call might come up with some ideas that they can too, and I think Richard also mentioned, is it can really help focus a strategic planning process. Because of the number of scales and the number of areas and overlap in the different questions, it allows a cooperative to really drill down to the key areas and prioritize where they're going to put their resources instead of trying to guess at what is going on in their cooperative. This really creates a roadmap for how to improve and how to also identify successes, especially if people are using appreciative inquiry processes. It allows them then even to create a model for how to take the areas that they aren't doing as well in and improve. Again, education efforts, I know when I've done it, one of the big areas I found is that the membership often has a different view of their cooperative from what the policy manual says, and so there's often an issue where the members don't necessarily haven't really been educated in their own policies, and so I think it helps really identify the importance of education within cooperatives and ongoing education efforts. And then finally, I think another really good selling point, and even to leaders of co-ops, is that it helps allow the hidden voices to get through because of the anonymous response, because of the high number of scales. It allows the status quo to not really be seen as the status quo anymore. And this, again, gives, especially in, I think, the more less formal workplaces, where maybe the unwritten rules have a certain amount of power within the organization, and everybody thinks everything is fine. The intensity of the Co-op Index allows those other voices to come out and maybe helps leadership connect more to the mass membership. And I think that's really all I have for today. Just a little short effort, but again, it's an evolving process, and so that's why we're really excited about people getting out there and using it in the field, and hope we get more people involved with IMPACT.
Thank you, Jean, very much. So this ends our presentations part, and we are looking forward to your comments and questions and a discussion from here on.
Okay. I'm going to start with a question that was asked by someone who had to leave the webinar a little early. Yes. If you're a co-op developer with a provincial association and you'd like to get trained to administer the tool, how do you go about doing that? Do you have to be a member of the IMPACT Co-op? How much does it cost for training?
Yeah, in terms of the way we've done it to date is we've basically done a number of all-day training sessions, all day meaning roughly from about 9:30 till 3:34. So, around a 5-hour training session with an hour off for lunch. It's been open to anybody that's actually interested in becoming trained in the use of the tool. So there's been no restrictions to date as to, who could or could not take the training. And so we've had, a broad array of folks within the U.S. through their DAWN network and through the Co-op Zone network in Canada, and some independent folks that have participated in that training. At this stage, we haven't got any new training dates set up. Essentially, what we do coming out of today's call is, try and identify if there's another group that would like some training in terms of learning to use the Co-op Index, and if they're not in the same geographic location, then it's likely to try and do a more extensive online training program for them, via this sort of format here. So in terms of joining the Co-op Index itself, there is no cost to joining the IMPACT Diagnostic Services Co-op at this point. If you're to join as a cooperative consultant, then obviously you need to be trained in the use of the tool, and so that's essentially the process. So it's open at this stage, and as we can identify a group to train, we'd work out the details of the most appropriate way of doing that. We try and keep the cost relatively modest. If we have grants to pay for the trainer, there hasn't been any cost, and if there's not grants to pay for the trainer, then we would have to have a modest cost depending on the numbers of people, probably maybe $100, $150 for the day's training if we couldn't subsidize it.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay, we've got a question now from Lily Ying of the Co-operators.
She writes, due to today's relevance and urgency for ESG best practices, can ESG be integrated into Co-op Index, and if so, how can it be done, and has any co-op been looking at this? I'm afraid I don't know what ESG is.
I was going to say, can I ask what ESG is?
Wendy?
Yeah, according to Wiki, it's environmental, social, and corporate governance.
Yeah, I mean, one of the tool obviously looks at a broad array of issues, and so does have some questions around environment, around governance, and around social outcomes, and the social impact within the cooperative itself on its members and its employees. So in some ways the tool does address some of these issues, but it does it from a kind of broad overview. So, with the environment, again, I think there'd be, perhaps 5 or 6 questions that are relevant to the practices of the co-op from an environmental perspective. So they don't give you an in-depth analysis of any one particular area, but it would give you an analysis, for instance, the environment aspects of the co-op are seen as an area that is severely lacking or could be actually quite strong. So it could point you in the direction of needing to do further research on things like the environment, which would lead you to other more sophisticated in-depth tools in that particular area for your co-op. So I think that the Co-op Index is more an overview tool that can help point at areas that need consideration, and then more in-depth things around governance, environment, etc., would perhaps be follow-ups based on the results and responses that are seen from the Co-op Index tool.
I think, if I may say a few words, the problem is that ESG is being used more and more often in literature as a kind of standard for different kind of ratings and comparisons between companies. So I think sooner or later, if this is not just a fashion, but something more deep, we'll be able to create also scales just for those 3 aspects. And I think there are plenty of questions. Maybe there are not so many questions about environment, maybe, but as regards social responsibility and governance, corporate governance, there are plenty of questions on this. So corporate governance is in fact hidden in many questions, what we have now as management practices. So I think if we want it, if there is a need for this, of course the tool may be developed in this direction.
We'll move on now to Justin Ellerby.
So I'm curious just to hear from some of the developers, what are some of the surprises that have come out of the process thus far, especially as you've been revising the tool. John spoke to some of the things that have come up in terms of language being a little bit less hierarchical. But I'm also curious about what the analysis of the results thus far has yielded, and whether there are any surprises or anything like that.
Thanks, Justin.
I'll take a crack. I mean, I'm not sure that there's been surprises. You know, in terms of the co-ops that I've worked with using the tool, I think rather than surprises, there was clarifications and focuses that came out of using the tool. I don't think there was anything that came up that everybody said, you know, I would have never ever dreamt that that was an issue. They may not recognize the scale of the issue. They may not have actually been addressing the issue in any kind of formal way. But from my experience, generally the co-ops have said to me that the kinds of results that are coming out seem to be in line with, you know, sort of a post-reflection, looking back, saying, you know, that wasn't terribly surprising. And so I think that for some of them, actually, they've seen that as actually a confirmation of the value of the tool, because it seemed to confirm to them that the tool actually was responding, you know, in a kind of accurate way to many of their intuitions. One thing that has come up in the larger co-ops that have used it is that there has been quite dramatic differences between different areas of the co-op to the same questions. And so if you've got a co-op in which you do have a hierarchical management structure, and you have line workers, you know, manufacturing or processing certain things, you have, you know, large sales staff or administrative staffs, it does seem apparent that it's not unusual for there to be quite a diversity of perception about certain activities within a co-op based on those different groups. And I would say if there's anything that's surprising, it may be the scope of those differences between different groups within a co-op. And again, this only shows up if you're, you know, probably talking about a co-op with, you know, 30 or 40 people at a minimum before you can start doing that kind of demographic analysis. But it has proved very interesting in terms of that aspect of it for larger co-ops. Smaller co-ops, obviously you can't isolate the demographics in the same way. You just don't have the numbers to maintain confidentiality, so it doesn't have the same role, or that can't produce the same sort of, if you like, surprises.
I wanted to just add a comment, yeah, that's also not surprises, but just a general observation, that with the small cooperatives, it seems what this kind of analysis does, it moves conversation from personal into an analysis of what's going on the organizational level. And so it helps them actually move away from the personal, you know, interpersonal dynamics in the co-op, and that's been a positive outcome of this.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just take a couple of other questions and then we'll come back to Justin. So Wendy, I'm going to unmute you now if you'd like to ask your question.
Okay, thanks. So thanks a lot, everybody, for this. It's been a great webinar. I've been so excited about this index from the first time I saw it about 5 years ago, and I really think the rollout of it is exciting. I'm just finished my third year at St. Mary's, and I'm going to be doing my capstone paper on supporting co-op training in Cuba with the farm co-ops. And so I'm really excited to actually participate in this Co-op Index training program, and I'm excited that it's available in Spanish. I'm wondering if there's has there been any experience in applying this to co-ops who've grown up out of the socialist context?
Not yet, I must say, because in Poland we have the Polish version and Polish translation, and we are planning to use it quite soon, but for credit like cooperative banks. So it will be slightly different than worker co-ops, but not. It has not been used, for instance, in Poland yet. Mm-hmm. We use similar tool in other companies, also in employee-owned companies. So I have written recently a paper about similar tools and consequences and explanations what's happening in Poland. So if you're interested, I could send you the paper, but this is not about cooperatives, but there's other companies, and one of them is employee owned. That's all that I have the experience with this tool or similar tool.
Sure, that would be great. Thank you. And I'm very interested in the training Co-op Index training program.
Thanks, Wendy. If I can add a note there, because Wendy is working with Cuba, and I think if you will be working with the Cuban agriculture cooperative, this would be a perfect thing to develop, actually, specifically for the Cuban context. If you're up for that, I think that would be a good project.
Exactly. Exactly, and an app is already moving forward. We gave them a 3-year strategic plan for training, and I would think that after we get sort of on page 1, this would be excellent for, rollout in about 18 months if we could develop something for that. So really excited. Thanks.
Okay, moving to Havana, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks, Wendy.
I'd like to take a question from Russ Christensen now.
Yeah, thanks everybody for this webinar. My question basically is, it does appear that this is a tool for the collection or aggregation of individual co-op members' perceptions. So you aggregate those individual perceptions, and then you have those different indexes that you use for that so that they can all see where they fit in. So I guess my question is around next steps, which I'm assuming you could then through that tool identify priority areas, and then you could move forward and set measurable objectives or benchmarks and introduce other best practices like ESG or other tools. So that's my question, is sort of around the next steps and how you see that working.
Just a clarification, Russ, do you mean the next steps in terms of developing additional tools, or do you mean the next steps with an individual co-op?
I think, well, it could be both, but my initial question is really around, okay, you use the tool with a co-op, and then what do you do after that? I assume that you can, move forward with different measurable objectives that you would set collectively with the group, or benchmarks, or look at other best practice tools, etc. And I suppose IMPACT over time could develop some of those, follow-up tools too.
Yeah, I guess in terms of the approach that I've been taking with the co-ops that I've worked with is that the recommendations that come out at the end of the full process of doing the diagnosis is really identifies area for exploration, work, and improvement. And so then it's really a second stage altogether beyond the diagnosis. It's really then the next stage is, setting up a process with that particular co-op to act upon the diagnosis, because the diagnosis can be done, and like any, as Canadians know, we can have royal commissions that sit on shelves forever. The diagnosis could also sit on a shelf in a cooperative. So it's very important that there's a follow-up process, particularly if you're working with an external consultant, to identify, what are the priorities that need to be focused on, and then to, work with that co-op to get the appropriate resources. The person doing the diagnosis may not be the expert in that area, so it's a question of then saying these are the areas for work, and then working with the cooperative to determine, what it's our priorities and what are some of the areas and the kind of assistance that they may need. It could be training, it could be could be things like changing their accountant, it could be internal training for co-op members. It could be, as we mentioned earlier, doing some sort of full environmental audit of the co-op to see what's really happening there, if not much is going on. So the tool really becomes the foundation then for those next steps. But we have not, as the diagnostic tool itself, had the resources to work with the co-ops that we've done the process with in an in-depth fashion after the diagnosis. We basically have worked with them to identify areas, made suggestions, but they've been on their own as far as having to then resource that and move that forward, which is a weakness, but it's just been in large part a function of resources and financial resources as well.
Okay, because I think being a consultant to other companies, I always, and diagnosing them, I always hear, okay, you told us all about this, what are our weaknesses, what about how we could improve it, and could you give us some more? So I think you're right that logically we should develop some other things. And on my side, I wrote a book about total participation in management, which is in fact a collection of different practices from the kind of democratic companies all around the world. So this is one thing, and it has been translated to French, Spanish, English, and so if you are interested, I could simply send the PDF to you. So this is one thing. The other thing is that we should be, and I hope that sometime in the future, if we find funds for this, I think we should send people to different places to collect interesting practices. And because I had the possibilities, one of my students went to Mondragon for half a year, and she is now writing her PhD about the practices and management there. One of my students went to SUMA in Britain, and again, yesterday I have read some part of her book about SUMA, which looks like a kind of ideal co-op with very many interesting practices. So I think sooner or later, if there is need, we should collect such practices and then somehow find a way to distribute them. And I think it would be great if the IMPACT was and all the consultants and the developers could both collect and then share those practices with the clients or the co-ops that they work for.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, does someone else want to speak to that?
Well, I was just going to comment. I think from someone who's a practitioner as well as doing kind of a hat in all worlds. One thing I guess to keep in mind is the tool is really aimed at more of the governance membership side of the organization, and in this case with worker co-ops where you have the members and workers are the same person, a lot of what is engaged around the tool is helping them create the membership infrastructure for their co-op. And so for instance, worker co-ops, at least in the U.S. and from my experience, are really good at managing their operations, but what they don't necessarily have the skills for are dealing with accountability issues and governance issues, and that's where they can get into trouble if the only available source to learn about those is from investor-owned enterprises, that then they end up creating structures that aren't designed for a worker cooperative environment, and so it is kind of unique in the sense of the worker co-op world. And so I think it's just important kind of maintain that. I mean, a best practice, I've always kind of resist that term just because I think to myself, well, best practice for who? And the world of worker co-ops tends to be so diverse compared to the other co-op sectors that we'll have manufacturing, we'll have grocery stores, and we can. It's an accountability structure, for instance, for a 250-person taxi cab cooperative is going to be very different than what's needed in a 7-person licensed therapist cooperative, for instance. And so I think that's kind of the power of the tools. It allows a person to come in and actually work to construct sort of a unique process that fits that cooperative's culture within the context of the cooperative identity. And that's, I guess, kind of what it's going to add over there.
Okay, that might be a good lead into Justin's question, because he was talking, you know, there's been this mention of the sort of baseline of the ideal cooperative, but he has a question about how that might not apply to all co-ops equally.
So basic, just short prelude. My second question came a lot out of an article I read by George Cheney and Leslie Stoll called Participatory Paradoxes. It's fascinating, I think, to everyone on the call if they haven't read it already. And basically, one upshot of the paper is that it really complicates and problematizes some ideas about what participation actually means to workers a lot of times, and how it can be, you know, more different than what they want or more than what they want, and how that's really going to vary by individuals and by the level of agency that they've had in other life experiences, as well as from the co-op itself. So in that sort of context, I wonder about how when we talked a little bit about the difference between aggregated results and individual level results, but I do wonder a little bit about how perhaps going forward, and particularly when we're using the index with larger co-ops where you can parse out those individual responses, how we might account for differing and various goals of participation among workers within the co-ops that we study.
If I may answer this question, because in fact, when I was presenting the slide with the line and with different, I said I used the term of repeated measures, or I meant that, and this is something that I've already imagined, that when doing the diagnosis, the report should not go only to the manager or to the leader of a co-op, but in fact every single member or employee should get their own individual report as well. And I think it could be easily done technically. All we have to find is the money to prepare such a tool for doing it. So I think I absolutely agree and understand that, and I already have, I don't know whether you know, there's a model of Victor Vroom of participation. I think it's quite flexible and situationally dependent. And I think we could build an individual reports on such on the same questions, or maybe we should add some extra questions to the tool. But as I say, this would require some funding to develop it. So this is more or less it. But from the point of view of the idea of the tool, it is exactly, it should be our purpose to give every person his individual report.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay.
On this note, that employees have a different interest in participating and a different understanding of what participation is. I think this should be really up to the cooperative to recognize, not an outsider, a consultant, to tell them, oh well, you know, maybe your members have a different taste for participation. So if a co-op sees that some of the results are not so good, they should be the ones to recognize, well, this is because we don't care, you know, or whatever the case may be. I'll give you an analogy. In academia, the academics have three things to do: teach, research, and do the administrative part. And everybody's trying to stay away from the admin part. And we all know that, okay? So some of us do very little, and some people do more. So it depends on the preferences. It's recognized by the insiders, okay? So likewise, in democratically managed and governed places, you will have that differentiation. And some people simply will not want to be involved in a lot of meetings and debates. Others will want to do more of that. So it's something internal, I think, And as long as the tool can identify issues and the co-op can then say, yeah, well, we know we have this and we want to keep it that way, either they can adjust the tool or they can simply run with it and be aware. But this awareness part, I think, has to be shifting to them.
And if I can jump in too, I think at least my experience has been that people's participation levels are going to be different, but part of when they respond to the survey, they recognize that the opportunity is there, and that has its own value to it, whether or not they take advantage of that opportunity. And then it's a question of, is the cooperative getting what it needs to get done with the people who are being active? And so, I think that's kind of the strategies that are involved.
I would just make one last comment about that, and that's that I think from again, looking at the, if you like, the ideal co-op side of things, one of the things that the tool does, and I think is similar to what John is saying, is I think, a lot of people's level of participation is poor, not necessarily because they're not interested in participating, but because they haven't realized how, or the tools, or the confidence, etc., to actually participate more fully. So the tool, in terms of this process, can actually help people understand their capacities and enhance their capacities, and then the co-op can actually take steps if they want to enhance people's capacities to participate. So it's not just a question, I think, of just saying, well, we're not really interested in participation. The real question is, why aren't we interested in participation? Is it something that co-op is doing that's discouraging participation, or is it, the history that I've lived through, and, am I open to recognizing that I can create a better co-op for us collectively and for me individually by changing the level in which I participate?
So we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, and we can certainly continue on this topic, which is very interesting, but I just wanted to put out the other two things that have sort of been suggested for points of discussion. Lily Ng has left, but she said that she would be interested in having Richard provide some information on the tool's reliability, which I think is an interesting question because it's all based on, personal answers from employees. So I'm not sure how reliability is tested in that case. And then Sonia had suggested that it might be interesting to have John explain a bit more about what the appreciative inquiry process is. So I'll let you know that those are the two other things that have been put on the table, and I'll just let the panelists decide how they'd like to proceed from this point on.
Okay, as to reliability, of course we were, with the limited number of data that we have, because we have diagnosed several co-ops, we have calculated Cronbach's alphas, and each were satisfactory. I don't remember the numbers now, but I think we certainly did it because we were working on it. But really to test the reliability, we would need many cooperatives, much more cooperatives of a certain type, because we can test the reliability only for certain groups of similar co-ops. So in other words, what I want to say, for the companies that or the co-ops that we have diagnosed, we have calculated it, but I think this is too little. I don't think it's satisfactory, and we wait for more data to calculate it properly.
And I guess I'll just mention, I'm certainly not an expert on appreciative inquiry, but it's basically examining what works well in an organization and trying to transfer those lessons to something else. For instance, at Union Cab, when we redid our disciplinary structure, we looked at our accident review committee, which reviews all of our collisions, and well, we found that was the one disciplinary body at Union Cab that never had any controversy surrounding it. So that became a model for us to work off of, and then we started looking for other models of things that people thought really worked well, and tried to see how we can take those lessons to apply them to something that people thought needed a severe overhaul. And that's kind of a very rough and probably inaccurate description of appreciative inquiry. But
well, I just wanted to thank everybody. I'm amazed that the technology really did work, seeing how we're on different corners of the planet. I just want to say thank you all, and until the next webinar. And thanks, Catherine.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.